Welcome back to Mike's Motorworx, and today we're working on Project Fast Fish. I was working on a couple of odds and ends and I thought, hey, what an opportunity for an introductory tutorial. You don't want to miss it because it all happens right now here on Mike's Motorworx as we're working on Project Fast Fish. For those that don't know, Project Fast Fish has been the heart of this channel, and there's been a lot of good things going on with Project Fast Fish. In fact, this is what sparked the idea of doing the channel. Now, what we're doing today is we're kind of doing some odds and ends trying to finish things up. And I got to a piece and I'm like, you know what? I've done some explanations on how to do what I'm fixing to instruct, but I haven't really done an independent video dedicated to, well, doing this step. So I wanted to walk you through that. So what we're going to do is we're fixing to take a panel and I'm going to walk you through the process of putting that panel on. Now this will apply to all panels that you would have come across, or a majority of the panels, not all. And it's designed really to help show you guys and girls how this is done. And believe you me, if I can do it, you can do it. So let's see what we're looking at. This part is from AMD, and all the panels that have gone onto Project Fast Fish, except for two, have been from AMD. And really, really good stuff. And I've got plenty of information about AMD. Now, the panel itself is as you can see, a trunk latch support. So what this panel does, I'll show you over here. What this panel does is it's a support for the tail light panel onto the back. You can see where my hand is right there, all right? And this panel goes right here and supports this from flipping around. And it also provides an area for that trunk latch so that when the trunk closes, it stays latched. So this has to be welded into this place right here. And so I'm going to take you through the steps of making that happen. Now, every time I take a new panel out, one of the first things I like to do is give it just a basic general inspection. And it doesn't matter if this is a quarter panel or a roof panel or a small bracket or anything. I like to give it an inspection. And things I'm looking at are what's on there and what do I need to think about. And did it come with everything as was promised? So I'm turning this panel around, I'm looking at some things, and I'm noting a couple of things. A couple of the things I'm noting. One, I don't have to worry about adding or welding in any kind of nuts for the bolts because they are right here provided for me. And this is obviously where the latch goes itself. I'm also looking at the part to see, okay, where does it line up and where does it need to be welded at? And I'm looking over this thing and I'm thinking, okay, there are really several different welding points. I have a welding point up into this area where it goes against the back. I'll show you that in a minute. And I have a welding point, couple welding points down here. Now this is going to be particularly interesting because I'm thinking, all right, how much space do I have? Do I want to do a plug weld? Do I want to do a tack weld? How do I want to get this into place? Or should I just run a couple of beads or lines on it to make it fit on there? Now these panels in the back here, these really aren't going to be welded into place. These aren't going to be welded, I don't think, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to figure that out when I get it tacked, or not tacked in, but doing my test fitting. And so it'll tell me, do I need to tack these in or are they good? What's going on? So let's go give this thing a test fit. Looking at the test fitting here, obviously it's not into place yet. I know this bracket goes here, as you guys saw earlier, and I'm trying to do this while holding the camera, so this is really, really interesting. You can see where I slid it in up here because it goes underneath this lip. This lip is where the trunk gasket goes, or the weather seal, or the weather strip, if you will. All right, so I'm holding it into place, and I'm saying, all righty, well, it's not quite fitting in, because you see I got a big gap here, I got a big gap here, it's not touching down there. I got two little tabs that are holding it up. All right, well, I need to go bend those so I can see if the rest of these will fit. So let's go do that real fast. To bend these tabs, it really doesn't take a whole lot. If I wanted to use a pair of pliers, I could. In reality, it doesn't take a whole lot to make these things move. I wouldn't recommend cutting these off because you could actually use this as a point to weld on, as opposed to trying to weld it without those on there. Now, if you were to take a pair of pliers, it would just be a matter of just pulling those up with the pliers. I happen to have a set of panel locking pliers, and this is really designed to hold two pieces of panel together over longer periods. This is way overkill for this, but we're going to do it anyways. And the trick is just try to make sure that that just stays as flat as possible, and you're going to end up having to hammer this into place eventually anyways, so we just simply take that and then pry it up. You know, metal is a very malleable substance, and it allows you to easily make bends and such as that. All right, let's go try it again and see how it fits. All righty there. Let's see what else we got going on here and how we need to make it fit properly. All right, so I'm looking at this. Now that's into place, I'm seeing it's a lot more fit within this zone here. It's a little bit lacking here, so the slope is slightly off, so I got to think about how I can get that into place here. Let's take a look-see. All right, I got a good clamp and grip up there. I got it falling down there just a little bit. And it doesn't need to be welded up in there because it's just holding that into place. There's a purposeful gap on that. And if I remember right, even when it was OEE from the factory, there was still a little gap between here. This wasn't welded in this place. So I'm not going to worry about welding it here, okay? That's just more or less to keep it from giving a little bit of flex, right? Now I can still move the panel a little bit in and out, but no matter where I move it to, it's not going to fix the angles there. I can move it up, try to press it down. Let's see here. Nope, I want it to fit, touch there. So we're basically as good as it's going to get for right now until I really hammer these pieces down. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and get a pair of locking pliers and hold it into place up here, and then take a closer look down in these sections there, and maybe even get the hammer out and kind of hammer those into place. So let me get that real fast. Now these are typical welding clamps. Again, they're locking pliers, and I'm using these because if you notice, I have a little bit of room here where I'm not going to mess up this rolled edge up here. And I really don't want to mess that up. And that would happen if I were using the other pliers I just showed you, the panel pliers. So again, I'm putting this kind of into place here, making sure we're lined up where we need to be, and just going to do a quick clamp thusly. And we're still into place. We're locked into place up there. And I'm going to look at this from all angles, see how it is. Again, I got that gap there. I could push those into place, push that back down. I got the same thing going on over here. And over here, it's not really touching, so I don't want to weld that onto there because that's not really how it's designed. And the next thing I'm looking at is how is it fitting up here? And the reason I'm thinking of how it's fitting up here is because I'm thinking instead of doing a plug weld or a rosette weld up here, I am going to use my resistance welder, or what they call a spot welder. And so I want to make sure that I have a nice, good surface that's actually mating there and touching completely, because once it's welded into place, it's in place. So I'm looking at all of that, and I think we're good. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the camera off real quick, get those pieces hammered down, and do some more visual stuff, and I'll be right back with y'all. So what I'm going to do is I've got these down into place. I had to use a combination of the hammer and the chisel to do that. You saw that on the time lapse. And my welding points are going to be, I'm going to do a tack weld here to hold this into place, a tack weld here, and then I'm going to run a couple of different beads, probably 2 beads, one here, and then one over here, and one over here on the other side. Additionally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep this for some spot welds, and I'll probably use 2 or 4. I'll probably use 4 spot welds on this. One on the inside or outside, or I'm sorry, outside and the inside. And so I'll show you the tools that I use for that to make it happen. Now, usually on these panels, I would do a plug weld or a rosette weld. And I'll show you that a little bit later. But basically what that would be is you would drill a hole into these panels here and then fill that with weld in an attempt to seal that. Unfortunately, these panels are smaller here, so there's not enough room to get a good rosette weld in there. So in this case, it's going to be better for me just to go ahead and run those beads on the side, and of course up here to run those spots so there's less grinding and filling and all that good stuff to work at. And I'm not having to play with the wand to kind of get into this spot up there, into this narrow area. So now it's time for area prep and panel prep. To prep the area, the first thing you need to do is go ahead and outline the areas where you are either going to be making those plug welds, or in my case, running those bead welds. And I'm just going to outline the area of the panel with my paint pen. Now, if you don't have a paint pen, you have a Sharpie, that's fine. I just find that for this process, the paint pen works much better. And again, the only place we're running those welds are right here on the bottom. So that's all I'm doing is drawing that out. Let me move the camera so you can see that in the blue there. Move, there you go. And you can see I added a blue line here on the trunk floor itself. Now the areas up here, I'm going to go ahead and on the back side of these, I am going to go ahead and remove the EDP because spot welding works better when there's no EDP or the electronic deposit protective coat film, okay? And it works better metal to metal or with fresh weld through primer on the areas where we are making those welds. So I need to prep the area behind here and on the panel itself. Now on the panel itself, I'm thinking, okay, there's nothing really to mark here because I'm not marking where I'm putting plugs at or need to make holes. So I don't need to worry about that. So to prep the panel itself, the first thing you need to do is get rid of all the EDP coating because that's going to interfere with the weld. So we need to pull off the EDP coating in the areas where I'm applying direct weld at. Additionally, I'm looking at this panel thinking, hey, I'm never going to see this back panel again. So one of the things I need to think about is getting this coated with, at minimum, an epoxy primer so that the areas back here I don't have to worry about again, and it's going to be sealed from moisture and rust and what have you. I'm also looking at this panel thinking, hey, I've got to remove the EDP from here, maybe add some weld through primer here to make sure that I get the best adhesion to the vehicle itself over in that area. So let's go ahead then and let's get this process started. But what I'm going to first do is show you the tools that can be used for this. If you don't have any of the pneumatic tools, no worries. Any kind of abrasive would work. So this happens to be a brass bristle brush, probably a little too soft for pulling the EDP off. If you had a steel one, that would be better, and that's sufficient to use. And you can put this on a drill and pull that EDP coating off everywhere else. Absolutely fine, absolutely perfect, nothing wrong with that. If that's what you have, use it. Another option is if you have one of these air-driven belt sanders. These are fantastic for not only grinding off welds in tough-to-reach areas and making quick work of certain welds. You can also go ahead and quickly and easily pull off the EDP coating of the panel itself. And these are really awesome. I don't recommend using the higher grit belts because I found that the material that they put, the abrasives on the material, tends to just fall off and you go through belts really quick, and that's just way too much. About 120, 150 grit is all you need. And these are really awesome tools, but they do pull a lot of air. The best thing to use for a majority of panels is a 90-degree die grinder such as this. Now on this one, I happen to have a grinding wheel on that, which you don't really want to use on the just to pull the EDP off, but it does make quick work of it. Now that happens to have a grinding wheel on it, but these surface conditioning pads work the best to pull that off. So I'm going to real quickly go ahead and pull the surface off of the EDP, or the EDP off this back surface here and off the front to ensure that I get a really good contact with the other side for this panel. And then I'm going to use the same thing to quickly go through the areas where I'll be doing those line welds. So to let you guys see how easy this is, it doesn't take a lot of time. I'm just going to use my surface conditioning disc and my 90-degree air grinder and just go ahead and quickly remove this. And I'm going to do this in real time so that you could see how this works. I'm not even going to speed the video up. I'm just going to do this in real time to let you see how that works. Now, one of the things I'm making sure of when I'm using this thing is I'm minding the edge here, because this is going to spin in a clockwise motion there. So I'm really careful about the edges here. So when I get towards the edges, you'll see me flip so that the debris is chucked off this way and I'm not ruining the disc. So here we go. And there you go. Now it's ready for weld through primer. This is a weld through primer. And what weld through primer basically does, without going into the chemical reactions and such that's going on here, it allows you to put a protective coat on whatever you're welding, so that where you don't want metal, especially in auto body restoration where you're going to be exposed to the elements, where you don't want metal on metal directly, it acts kind of like a barrier, adding a little bit of zinc to the metal surface to help prevent rusting. Now, it doesn't prevent rusting, it just helps prevent rusting. So it also it allows a sometimes people say it adds a better connectivity with the welding process, so that the welds are kind of more bite or holding things together during the welding process, you know, that metal to metal and that puddling. However, that's up for debate. I use it for an anti-corrosive. And additionally to that, you don't want to put, say, like an epoxy primer, because an epoxy primer is a barrier. You won't get through that. Additionally, the chemicals in here won't infuse in the puddle to make the puddle weaker, where you will get that with, say, an epoxy primer. So I'm going to go ahead and spray this on all the areas in which I'll be welding, and then I'm going to go ahead and spray the back of this with the epoxy primer and mask off the areas where I don't want this particular primer to go. Now, if you're spot welding, here's the catch, all right? If you're spot welding or doing any kind of welding, you don't want to have this sit for too long. I would say 48 hours for spot welds, and you can do up to a week or two with plug welds, but it actually gets too much to go through if it's put on too thick for the weld to work accurately, if that makes any sense to y'all. So here we go. Just a quick shake. And just a quick spray. That's all it needs. Doesn't need to be run, doesn't need to be super close. All it takes is just a quick spray. And I'll go ahead and do the other side as well since I'm here. Again, not too thick, doesn't need it. And there we go. And we can let this sit for a little bit. In fact, I could let it sit this way, it won't hurt anything. Let that dry for a few minutes, and I'm going to mask off those areas where I just sprayed, and then go ahead and put the epoxy primer on there. In this can is a 2-stage epoxy primer. And it's two-stage because inside of here, there's actually a breakable two containers. There's actually two sections to this can. If you were to tear it apart after it was all drained out, you would see there's two different pieces inside the can. There is a section with the activator and just the epoxy primer itself. Because once the activator hits the epoxy primer, it wants to dry out. You can no longer spray it. So to use it, there's a little cap on the top and a little button on the bottom here. You press it down on the cap and it breaks that seal, allowing those two to mix. And then you shake it up really well and then you spray it. Now, epoxy primer is ideal to help prevent rust because it works as kind of like a epoxy coating that doesn't allow moisture in. And it's even better than a lot of the top coats and the clear coats that are out there that are a little bit more porous. Additionally, it's better than, say, like an etch primer, which is acetic base. And etch primer tends to, again, be porous. So this actually encapsulates the metal itself. Now, the catch is that when you buy one of these cans, you have about a 48-hour pot life to these things. So you want to have it planned out where you're going to be using this to get the most life out of one of these cans. There was once a single-stage epoxy primer out there that Eastwood sold, but that was really a paint with a lot of epoxy on there. So I think they stopped selling it as epoxy primer and turned it into their frame coat or chassis coat primer. Could you use that as well? Sure. Again, this is going to be on the inside of the vehicle, but it is going to be in a trunk or a wet area. So I'm going to go ahead and use the two-stage here. The cool thing about the cans is that you don't have to worry about taking the paint gun out and mixing the paint gun and then painting this and spraying this to get the best look. Weld-through primer doesn't take long to dry. In fact, it's already dry right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and tape that off and mask that off and then spray this. Now, of course, before you paint any area, you want to make sure it's clean and clear of debris. Now, because we're using a epoxy primer, you don't want to use paint thinner because it's more of an oil base and you won't have that adhesion that you need. So what I do recommend is, of course, read the label and see what would work for prepping the area. Now, there's a couple different options that are out there. You can get, say, like a pre-painting thing where you do the pre-paint spray where it's like an oil and grease remover and spray on one, you wipe it down, you're good to go. You could use xylol or acetone for the spray itself. And the acetone is really for epoxies and other adhesive-based primers and paints. So again, if you use a thinner or a mineral spirits, you don't want to use that here for the epoxy primer. So I'm just going to use some acetone. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect, so an old shop rag should work fine for this, okay? It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect because it's not like going to get the top coat on auto body or what have you. So I'm going to wipe this down, let it dry, and then go ahead and spray her down. And you know what? We're going to do this in real time just because. And I'm just going to put on some background music while I do this. Here we go. Let's get it saturated. Just doing a quick wipe. That's all it needs. Doesn't need anything more than that. And you can see that residue from the EDP is, not EDP, excuse me, from the weld-through primer is wanting to get pulled up with it, which is fine. Again, you don't need to pull that all the way out. You know, just wiping it around a few times should be sufficient. Again, this is just going on there as a sealer to, cleaner, because we're putting the epoxy on as a sealer. By the way, now's a great time to mention that if I am mentioning it or have a tool inside the video here, more than likely there is a listing for how to get to it through Amazon or any other site that doesn't have it. Or so if Amazon doesn't, excuse me, rephrase that, or any other site that you can get it from. Now, I do get a little bit of commission from Amazon if you buy a certain amount. I haven't gotten a commission yet because not enough people have bought something through those links, but that is an available option for you should you choose to do that. And you can also find the link where I got this panel from through AMD should you be working on doing this yourself. Again, I highly recommend AMD for everything. And you know what? I'll also go ahead and throw in a playlist for you to watch. the restoration process of Project Fast Fish. All right, so we got that sprayed. We got that right here in view of the camera. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and give this just a little shake. You can hear that there's 2 balls inside, those little mixing balls, so you can hear that rattling around in here. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my little pin here, and then I'm gonna put this on the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and press down. Sometimes it takes a little bit more force. So I'm gonna come over here and do it. There it goes. And then I'm gonna pull that pin and then just continue mixing. And you can even see here on the bottom that the stem was once all this color, but now that I broke that seal, it is now kind of like a blackish or grayish color. So we're gonna keep on mixing. Pop the can, and this does spray pretty good. Again, the best place to do this is about 6 to 10 inches away from what you're spraying, and there's a good fan or a spray pattern, and just a light coat is really, there it goes, now we're cooking, is really all it needs. It doesn't need to be perfect, because the idea is that we're just giving it, there it goes. That we're just protecting the metal underneath here. Let me turn this thing around here and get this side just a little bit better. And again, I'm not worried about the other side, because when I paint the truck eventually, our trunk, that will get painted. It's just this side that I'm heavily concerned with. All right, that's good enough for now. We might do another coat just because. Excuse me. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. As you can hear, yeah, it's a little bit heavy there. So let me go ahead and prep the area on the trunk. So we talked about prepping the area, and prepping the area is as important as prepping the panel that you're putting on. A couple of things you need to think about is, one, what areas will I have access to once the panel is on? Do I need to spray anything in advance? What's going on? Do I need to clean anything, etc.? And those same ideas that we did with the panel itself apply to the area. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take this blue line that I drew earlier, and I'm just going to take my surface conditioning disc and I'm just going to bring this down to metal. Okay, so it should be a simple process of just bringing this down to metal. Here we go. Same thing over here. Oops. And then of course the area up in here where I'll be doing my spot welding. So it's gonna look funny, but I'm doing this just for the camera, or else you'll see my whole body in here trying to get it working, and that'll look weird. So let me go get this taken care of. All right. Now I know the air compressor is running, so I should be speaking loud enough to overtalk the air compressor. Already, when I put the panel on, I had already put a coat of epoxy primer on the back side here. So over here, I'm not too worried about this area, because I know that when we spray it, we'll have access to spraying this inside here, so I'm not worried about the epoxy primer on here. But what I am going to do is go ahead and get the weld-through primer on the areas where I just exposed to bare metal. Now with the panel and the area prepped, it's time to go ahead and get this in its final location. So I'm just going to eyeball it here to make sure where it needs to be on the bottom there. I see that that's good. I'm going to pull this up to where it needs to be there. And now I'm going to go ahead and clamp these into place, at least up here. But I'm going to leave enough room where I can get those spot welds where I want them or need them at. So let's go ahead and get this guy clamped down. All right, and that should be a good clamp. I felt it pull in there. Let's make sure this guy is good as well. Oop, let me get the other one I pulled. That way I could use this to pull that guy in. Well, you know what? I'm going to pull that in later. So let me get this back down to normal. Here we go. Oh, it sounds like the rains are coming. I was expecting the rains today. So again, I'm just going to put this here and then clamp it. And the idea is just I want it to touch metal on metal. And I'm going to show you why here in a few minutes. Make sure this is as tight as it's going to get. Yeah, that panel moved in, so that is pretty tight. All right. All right there and right there. So those pieces should be touching and we're awesome. And then I'll pull this in down here in a few minutes when I get ready to weld that, and we should be good. And this panel should be good down there. And I'll get that pulled in when I'm ready to do the final weld on that. And we are awesome. This is where it needs to be at. All right, so what am I doing next? Well, what's next is I'm going to go ahead and do a spot weld or a resistance weld here. And what you're going to see me use is a device. It's a little bit bulky. It's a little bit heavy. It is effectively what they call a resistance welder or a spot welder. And what it does is it sends electricity through the metal directly. And then once it sends electricity, the resistance from the metal heats up. Okay, so think of it like a resistor on an electronic device or anything that gets electricity through it. You send electricity through, say, like a copper cable, it will heat up with the amount of amperage that's going through there because of the electrons that are flowing. It creates heat from friction, so on and so forth, of the atoms moving around, the electrons moving around and what have you, pulling that current. So basically it welds those. Now the timing when you use a spot welder is not really up for debate. I see a lot of guys say hold 2 seconds. Here's what I've been finding out. If I let that welder get cherry red, okay, when I'm doing this, it gets too hot and then the clamp force from the resistance welder effectively pulls through the metal and melts it. You only want it on there for enough time to really heat the metal and then be done with it, okay? Now, a lot of the better welders, spot welders out there have timers on them. If you got good clamping force and what have you, and the right amount of current, the ideal time should be no more than, say, like a half a second. But I'm gonna do 1 second once I know that I have good current, because anything longer than that, I start pulling through and melting the metal because it gets too soft and it's easy to push through that. So let me get that device out and I'll show you that in operation. All right. Whew. This is heavy. This is our spot welder, and nothing really fancy to know about it, okay? Other than that, this one happens to be one from Chicago Electric. It's a Harbor Freight version of it. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on one of these things because you could easily spend $2,000 or $3,000 on one of these. If they're more than that. Depending on what you're looking for, there's some options. But for a basic spot welder, you could easily spend a lot of money on some of these. So I spent like $110 plus the pigtail. Or the cord for this. It's cost me about $130 or what have you. This is a clamp here. So what'll happen is as I clamp, I'm not going to turn it on. As I clamp it, okay, one, this thing is not really going to clamp down a piece of metal and send the current through that, okay? Unlike some of the other better welders that are out there. But what this effectively does is it sends current through this zone right here. And then it uses these 2 points. If there's any metal in between it, it heats up because the heat of the metal, the metal acts as a resistor. And then the amperage that's going through this heats up that metal. Now, there's a lot of debate of how long you should hold these on here and hold the button for it to make a good weld. Here's what I find, okay? The good commercial welders, the spot welders that are used by the professionals that have the clamping force and what have you, they recommend about a half a second, okay? Or X amount of cycles, okay? That's at 60 hertz, blah, blah, blah. I'm not gonna go into the math. But basically, it's about a half a second. I find that a half a second may not be long enough for one of these because you don't know if you're getting the exact good contact, so on and so forth. So here's my recommendation. One, if it glows, you're good. Okay, when it starts glowing, you can pull the trigger. You pull the trigger and it starts glowing, you're good. You've made that weld. Anything longer like that, like 2 seconds or 2.5 seconds, the metal becomes too soft, and then the clamping force here will end up melting through, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold this up vertically. It's gonna take a lot of oomph, okay? But basically, I'm gonna hold it up and get this point here and the point here. I'm gonna remove the clamps and then get the points on the inside. So basically, we are doing 4 points. So, wish me luck. All right, off goes the clamp. This thing is heavy. Alrighty. Here we go. Now you don't want to touch anything else metal. All right. Missed it. There it went. That's good. That's one. All right, let's try it the other way. Should be good. I'll put this right here for right now. If I hear it fall, I'm going to move my hands fast because that thing is like a falling brick. Alrighty, I got good there. I'm not going to touch the other one, but I bet when I let go of these clamps, those outside pieces aren't going to move. Oh yeah, we're solid. Nope, did not get that one good enough. Well, I'll do it again. Oh, that's on there now. There we go. There we go. And then I need to run one more right there. Towards the center. Here we go. There we go. And we're good. All right, with that welded into place, I'm now ready to tackle those guys down here with the regular welder. So that should about wrap it up here on Mike's Motorworx and Project Fastfish. But before we go, I'm gonna go ahead and show a segment where I did this, but with plug welds, and show you what that looks like, and we'll go ahead and let the video conclude. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like what you see, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and catch up what goes on next at Mike's Motorworx and with Project Fastfish. Thanks for watching. Real quick to showcase what I did to prep the panels. Again, nothing fancy here. I had my air punch and flange tool, my pneumatic one. This is an Onyx, and I'll leave the link in the description for you for this piece. It's a pretty handy tool, so you don't have to hand drill these out yourself, right? Just simply, well, I've shown it before you in the past. I'll leave a link. But basically, just gave it a couple of punches here and there, and spaced them out pretty evenly, etc. And then used some known points. And then on each end, that's going to be attached metal to metal, I went ahead and sprayed it with some zinc based primer. Again, this is the Weld through primer. This one happens to be an 86% zinc. And then the inside just got a light coating of the Duraspray single stage epoxy coating. This is something new from Eastwood, and it doesn't have a shelf life on it in the sense of once you crack it and shake it, you got to use it in 24 to 48 hours. This is really cool because you can just do little pieces at a time instead of having to worry about doing whole big pieces. Now, I could have left the inside of this with just the EDP coating, and that would have been fine, but I went ahead and took the extra step here. Now, if you can't get this, you can also use like a rust encapsulator or a standard spray to kind of keep that rust down. Over here, nothing fancy. I haven't done the label yet. If you want to, you can peel the label off, kind of like what I did. And then later on, I'm going to go ahead and use the surface conditioning tool to peel the label off. Over here, you don't have to run that weld through primer on the outside, but I do just because I don't know when it will be when I get this thing in epoxy coat. And you could just leave it just metal. However, you have to worry about rust, so on and so forth. So I just do that just because, you know, it just helps keep the rust down, etc. These guys didn't get it, but that's, you know, again, I'll get through it to it when I can, right?